Believe it or not, just 26 people now control as much wealth as half of the Earth's population. That's just one eye-popping finding from a new report by the group Oxfam. It was timed to be released just as the world's economic elites gather at an annual gathering in Davos, Switzerland. According to the study, billionaires' fortunes rose by 12% just in the last year. At the same time, the world's poorest half saw their wealth decline by 11%. Oxfam also claims $2.5 billion a day moves into the pockets of the world's wealthiest people. Paul O'Brien is the vice president of campaigns at Oxfam. He joins me now from Washington. Paul, explain how the poor are falling further behind. How does this happen in an expanding global economy?
Because trickle-down economics isn't working for them. They're not getting the benefits of economic growth. They were last year staying flat, and now they're falling further behind. That's the product of the global and national economies we have today.
What is the human cost of the wealth inequality?
Well, let me put it to you like this. Today, 262 million children will stay at home because their governments don't have the funding to put them into school. 10,000 people will die of basic health care problems because their health care systems don't have the funding. Women will spend about 16 billion hours today in unpaid care work because we're not investing in the public services, in the water, electricity, childcare systems that allows them to use their time more productively. So they are paying the price for the fact that our world is becoming increasingly unequal.
Those are incredibly unsettling numbers. We know the number of people living in extreme poverty has been falling steadily for decades. How do you square that with the new report?
Well, the people defined as living in extreme poverty by the United Nations live on about $1.95 a day. What we found is that if you look and that number, by the way, is slowing. It's not going as well as it should be. But if you look at the next level of poverty, those living with less than $5.50 a day, they're actually falling further behind in terms of having less wealth. And they make up the middle class in many of the countries where Oxfam works. We're in about 90 countries around the world, and we are seeing people working harder for less as they try to lift themselves from poverty.
Paul, how does last year's wealth trend compare to previous years?
Well, essentially, things are getting worse. The number of billionaires who have the same wealth as half the planet has dropped now to 26, as you said. What's happening for the poor and for this group that's living on less than $5.50 a day is even worse than it was last year. And when we look at the policies that have been put in place by governments around the world, including the United States, it's really not a surprise to us as an anti-poverty organization. Wealth is being taxed less, corporate power is being taxed less, and they are doing what you would expect corporations to do if they're unregulated. They're profiting more and they're paying less in taxes, and much of that benefit goes to the richest of the rich who hold shares in those companies.
You're talking about the tax rates falling for the world's richest people. How is that justified?
Well, and essentially, if you do nothing, that's what happens. What we need is the political will to justify what would be a much more inclusive economy and give people a shot at the dream of lifting themselves from poverty. Even here in the United States, people are working harder and harder for less, or to stay just where they are. And when you don't have a tax system that is actually going after the height of wealth, the most extreme levels of wealth, then you're going to see people falling further and further behind because simply the Treasury doesn't have the resources it needs to help people lift themselves from poverty.
What do you think should be done to reverse these trends?
Well, we are going to need tax reform. We're going to need a serious conversation about personal wealth and income tax. We're going to need corporate tax reform that makes sure that corporations can stop the global race to the bottom on paying less taxes, that can stop tax avoidance and are far more transparent. But ultimately, what we're going to need is those revenues to be spent on giving people better education, better health care, directly targeting women to make sure that the work they do is more productive by getting them out of the unpaid care economy and supporting them to be able to join the paid economy.
Aside from the moral argument, why should policymakers and the rich care about reversing this trend?
Well, increasingly, a lot of people very surprisingly care about this trend. Many of the people who are in Davos now who've been the beneficiaries of this unregulated system care about this trend. The International Monetary Fund, which used to argue precisely the opposite, is saying if we want to sustain growth rates around the world, we're going to actually have to tackle extreme inequality, because unless you redistribute some income so that the economies are filled with better educated and healthy people, you're not going to get growth.
An incredible inequality. Paul O'Brien, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Help save our generation.
Old Ben Franklin said, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn." Do you have a plan for your future, for the future of your loved ones?